Baptists sit on the back row. So I'm wondering, are you guys Baptist? Okay, that's fine. I don't mean to insult you by calling you Baptist. I'm a Baptist, so there you go. Okay. All right, so this session is You're Doing It Wrong, Get It Right. Now, again, I'm from Texas, okay? So I know some of you from maybe the Midwest or from, other places besides Texas, you don't say the word get the way I say it. Like, this word get is pronounced the same way as the other word get, okay? So you might say get, right? How many of you say get? Yeah, y'all are weird, okay? It's get, and I said y'all, right? Okay, that's Texas. Born and raised in Texas. Get her done, that's real. People do that. People say that. My accent just got really bad. Normally I have kind of a, I guess maybe standard accent, standard American accent, but when I'm around my family, it gets real Texas. So we'll see. You guys can see how I do with my accent. So today we're going to talk about Git, specifically using Git in Joomla development projects. More specifically in Joomla website development projects, not necessarily just component development or module development, but just overall in the process of building a Joomla website. If you're not using Git, you're doing it wrong, okay? So I found out in the past year, because Joe LeBlanc, who's sitting right back here, has dragged me kicking and screaming into the world of Git. And so that's my job today, is to try to drag you guys kicking and screaming into the world of Git, okay, if you're not already there. So the presentation is up, manoscrafted.com/git-it-write.pdf. So don't feel like you got to write all this stuff down, because it's up there, okay? And I'll tweet it out later too, so you guys can download it, okay? So who am I? Like I said, my name is Cory Webb. I've been working with Joomla and Mambo since 2003. So if you guys are familiar with the whole Joomla Mambo saga of 2005, I came around before that. So 2003, I founded Manos, which actually before yesterday was called Cory Webb Media. I thought it was kind of lame to have my name in the business name because it's not just me anymore. So I founded Manos in 2008. We just rebranded to Manos. I have stickers. It's not a Manos sales pitch, by the way, but if you want stickers, you can have a sticker. Joe has stickers as well. I wrote a book called Beginning Joomla Website Development in 2009, or it was published in 2009 by Rocks Publishing. I don't recommend it because it's really out of date. It's for Joomla 1.5, and obviously we're not there anymore. So, yeah, do you have a quick question?
Quick question. Was the new name of your company a reference to the horrible old...
Manos, The Hands of Fate? No, it was not. In fact, I'd never heard of that movie until we decided on the name. So if you have some time, Google Manos, The Hands of Fate. It's supposedly like one of the worst movies of all time. It's a horror movie. So I'll tell you the quick story behind it. So it was this horror movie made in the 60s. This guy in El Paso who was like a fertilizer salesman. This is the real. This isn't the story in the movie. This is the real guy. Fertilizer salesman apparently had some money, and so he lost a bet. And so his friend said, "You got to make this movie, this horror movie." And so he did. So look it up. It's on Wikipedia. It was on Mystery Science Theater 3000. You can watch the whole movie on YouTube because it's public domain now. Because it's so bad, nobody's making any money off of it, so they don't care. So the quality of the movie has nothing to do with the quality of our company, okay? It's just really funny. So you'll never forget Manos. So also, who am I? This is my family, my wife and 3 kids. Climbing. This rock is the mountains. My son wanted to go climb the mountains in Albuquerque. And so we're like, okay, let's go find some mountains. And that was what we found. So who are you? Who are you? How many of you are developers, programmers? Most of you. That's about what I expected. What about designers? Any designers in the crowd? We got a designer. All right. I applaud you.
I do both sides. So
Awesome. Any integrators?
what's an integrator?
Someone who takes Joomla and then takes components that have been built and templates and just puts them all together. You're like Dell, right? That's what Dell is. Dell doesn't make anything on their own. They just take parts that other people make and put them together into a computer. I used to work for Dell, so I could say that. I don't have Dell stickers. How many of you just heard about Git this weekend? First time you've ever heard of Git? A couple of you, okay. How many of you are Git novices? So you've heard of it, you've used it a little bit. Any Git experts? Anybody? Novice and a half. So somewhere in between novice and expert. Okay. Okay. I'm going to be honest. I'm more of a novice myself. Okay. So today, it's not going to be a deep dive into Git, at least not with me, because I can't dive that deep with you. I'm going to talk more about process because that's important, and I think it's important to think through version control as part of your development process. So today's agenda. First, we're going to say why version control. I'll do a little bit of an intro to Git, kind of what it is. It's a little bit of its background. Go over some Git basics, very basic, so just a few commands. I'm going to talk about some Git clients. So there's some tools that you can install on your computer to actually run Git, or to actually not run Git, but I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but to use Git. We'll talk about Git repository hosting, like GitHub, things like that. And then I'm going to kind of breeze through this and spend as much time as I can on the process of using Git in Joomla, in your Joomla projects. And then I want to leave as much time as possible for questions for those of you who really want to ask some hard questions. That's why I told Joe, you got to be here because I can't answer the hard questions. So Joe back here, everybody wave Joe. Joe LeBlanc, famous lynda.com author of such titles as Joomla 1.7, extension development, and Node.js, and something like that. So Joe's going to help us answer some questions on Git. So if we want to do a little deep dive, that's going to be the time to do it. So be thinking of questions, okay? Because I want to leave time for that. And if you don't have questions, we're all just going to sit here looking at each other, and it's not going to be fun. So why version control? Why version control? So we want a little less of this, right? How many of you guys ever said this? I'm going to be working on template.css today, so nobody touch it. Right? You guys have been there. You know what I'm talking about.
Or who touched it?
Right. Who touched my template.css file?
Who broke it?
Right. We're both editing this file at the same time. I just made my save, and you made your save and overwrote my save, and now I just lost a day's work. Thanks a lot, jerk. So we want less of that and more of this. Hey, let's all work on template.css together today and use our version control system to merge our changes at the end of the day. Woo! That's what we want. This is, in a nutshell, why version control, okay?
It's not working together, it's always a mess.
Yes. So it's easier to work as a team. You can take snapshots of your code throughout various stages of the process, stages of your development. You can do branching and staging and experimentation on the code without having to worry about, backtracking and getting back to a working version. And again, ability to revert back to previous versions of your code without having to panic and delete all the code you just wrote and figure out what you wrote and what's good and what's bad. You just revert back. So that's, in a nutshell, why version control. So be thinking about questions about that. That's why version control. Intro to Git. So just a quick intro. So the official website is git-scm.com. GitHub.com is not the official Git website. That's just a company that hosts Git repositories. GitSCM.com. There's documentation, all sorts of good stuff. So when you leave from here and you want to learn more about Git, go there first because there's a lot of great tools, a lot of great documentation. So Git is a distributed version control system, okay? So before Git, a lot of people use SVN and some other tools for version control. Git is more of a newfangled system, although it's not that new, I guess. Linus Torvald, how do you say his name? I don't even know. Torvalds? Okay. See, I'm a computer geek, and I can't say Linus's name. That's embarrassing. I just lost all geek cred with you, didn't I? By not being able to say Linus's name. Sorry. He wrote it to help track the development of the Linux kernel, right? It's like, oh, this isn't working. I'm just going to write a version control system myself. Okay. I wish I could do that. It's for enabling team collaboration. It's free and open source, so you just go download it and use it. No big deal. GPL v2 license. It's used by Joomla. So how many of you guys know that? How many of you guys knew that? Joomla actually uses Git now as its version control system. It was on SVN, now it's on Git, but it's also still kind of using both in a weird way. I don't quite understand that, but they're trying to drag everybody kicking and screaming into the Git world. And it's going to happen eventually. They're getting there. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, LinkedIn, Netflix, etc. All these big companies are using it. So why aren't you? That's embarrassing. You should be using it. So you can seamlessly branch and merge code changes, and you work locally. So you work on your local system. You set up your own web server on your system, like MAMP or XAMPP or whatever you happen to be using. You work locally, you set up your repository locally, and then you can merge it globally with all the other repositories. So one of the benefits, you have multiple backups. So there's all the developers that are using Git on your project, everybody has a copy of the repository, the whole repository. So you have all these backups of your code. You can set up custom workflows. So Git is really flexible. You're not locked into a specific way of doing things. So you can actually customize your workflow depending on how your project needs to be set up. You have data assurance. So they do all these kind of MD5 checksum checks on your data. Whenever you check in or commit your code, it does all that. So all the code has been verified and the data is solid. So, and then code staging. So you can actually stage changes and only commit certain changes that you want to commit. So you've got a lot of flexibility. So just some basics. I'm going to go over a few commands and talk a little bit about. Here's a list of just some basic commands. This is by no means an exhaustive list of commands. These are just the ones that I use on a pretty regular basis myself. If you're going to, you can do Git from the command line, so from like a shell or from terminal in your Mac. So these are just some of the commands that you're going to use: git clone, git init, git status, git add, git commit, push, pull, merge. Okay, I'll go a little more detail on these. So git clone, so you can clone an existing Git repository. So what that does is it takes an exact copy of that repository and clones it to your development folder for your project. So changes then can be shared between the original version that you've cloned and then the cloned version, okay? So when you make a change in your clone, you can push it over to the original. So here's a link. So at the bottom of all these slides, I'm going to have a link to the documentation page about it. So if you want to learn more about it and get a little more in-depth understanding of it, it's there. Again, these slides are on the web, so you can, as a reference. Git init is for initializing a new Git repository. So you would just create a new project from scratch. You would open up a folder, Git init in that folder, and it does everything for you. It sets up that folder as a new Git project. Git status. I feel like I'm saying the word get. Like Git. Sorry, it's just something for me. It's a Texas thing. Git status. Okay, this is it returns the current status of the repository. So basically, you see a snapshot of where you are and what's been changed since the last time you did a commit. Okay. Git add. So any changes that you've made that have not been added to the staging area, you use git add to add those changes to the staging area. So I usually use like git add, git add dot, and that adds all the changes. So that's just, I'm not advanced enough to get into like you can stage only this change or that change. I just stage them all because I'm not that advanced yet. So you can stage these modifications to be committed to the repository. So once you've added them, then you commit them, okay? So git commit is saying I want to commit this new code into the repository. This is code that this change is going in. And then I always add this, you do git commit -m and then quote, and then add a comment with that commit. So just something that says what you just did, okay? What change did you just make? Kind of explains it. Not like a verbose paragraph and a half. It's just like a little tweet, basically, of what you just did. So, you know, I modified template.css for this specific reason. Another thing you can do is, so instead of git add and then git commit, you can do git commit -a-m, and then that'll stage for you. It's a little shortcut. Git push. So what the git push command does, it says, so you've got your local Git repository, okay, that you're working in. And once you've committed your changes, you push those changes out to the remote repository, okay? The remote repository being the one that everybody else has access to. And so that everybody's pushing and pulling from that remote repository. And ultimately, the goal is everybody's got a copy of that same repository, or everybody's copy of the repository is identical once everybody's done their pushes and pulls. So git pull is you go fetch the remote repository, pull in any of the changes that have been made. So if I'm working on a team and Joe is over here making his code changes and he pushes up to the remote repository, I go git pull and I pull the changes that Joe made without him having to package up all these files and send them over to me and me figure out what was changed and merge them in there. I just do git pull and it merges all those changes for me. It's awesome.
Fetch is different from a pull, though, right?
A fetch is different.
Git fetch.
Man, you're asking the wrong guy.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Git fetch will pull,
Okay, go please.
Git fetch will get all of the changes from the server, but it won't merge them into.
Right.
Your local.
Yeah, so pull is fetch plus merge, right?
Yeah. Just reset your local working copy to whatever the origin is.
Git pull will.
Pull will.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
See, this is why I brought Joe here. So git merge, again, it merges two or more development histories together. Now that doesn't necessarily mean merging from the remote repository. You might within your repository have made a branch, and then you might want to merge the changes in that branch with the master branch within the same repository. So it merges two or more development histories together. See, it gets really complicated really fast, but that's cool because it's really flexible and you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. It's really powerful. So this is not a command. This is the gitignore file. So you guys are familiar with like a .htaccess file, right? That gives some kind of meta info about that web server and what should happen when somebody hits that web server. The .gitignore file, it's just a text file, and it's got information about files within that repository. Excuse me, I'm sorry. For those of you watching on video, I just coughed right into this microphone. That's awful. Sorry. So what you do is you list off all the files that you want Git to ignore, okay? So you don't ever want to track the changes to these folders. So for instance, one example, like within a Joomla project, is you want to ignore maybe your images folder, because like as people are uploading all these images, you might not necessarily want to track all that, because pretty soon your repository is going to get huge and unwieldy. So that's an example. You might want to track the images. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying don't track them. I'm just saying that's an example of something you might want to not track. Another thing, there's actually a huge Joomla gitignore file out there that if you're building a Joomla component, for example, and all you're focused on in your project is the component, you still got to have a copy of Joomla that you're working in for testing it, right? So you do a git init on your whole Joomla project, your whole Joomla install, but then the gitignore file tells it Git to ignore everything except the component you're working on. It's perfect, right? So you can test it within the Joomla environment, but Git's not tracking it, so you don't have to worry about that, all Git is focused on is the changes within the component you're working on. So that's another use for the gitignore. Yeah. Sure. Hey, I've got no shame here. I freely admit that Joe is an expert in Git, and I am not.
I've done that using gitignore to ignore Joomla and then write a component or a plugin or something. But I also want to, if I'm writing, for example, a plugin is self-contained inside its own plugin folder. I want to be able to, when I go to GitHub, click that download zip version and have an installable version of it based on that.
Yeah.
But when I do a gitignore, I can't seem to get just my plugin directory because I have the whole tree. I have plugins,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah.
You can make an installation folder with that because you just set a manifest file, XML file, in that root folder, and it can say the plugin files are located in plugin/system/Chad's plugin dot whatever. Yeah. Hey, guess what, guys? I just answered that question myself.
That was not a good question.
Right? Check me out. Didn't need my Git crutch for that one.
You're thinking about plugin component.
Right, exactly. Okay, so Git clients. So if you're terrified of shell commands or terminals or things like that, fear not, designer. It's okay. There's Git clients. So these are tools that you can actually install on your system, and it's a graphic user interface for handling all this stuff. So you just push a couple of buttons, and it does the pushes and pulls and commits and adds for you. So it's awesome. So here's a list of Mac ones. Honestly, I've not used any of these because I like to work in the terminal because it helps me to kind of understand what's happening. Once I'm more comfortable with that, then I'll probably get into using a client. But that's just how I think. Like, I started writing HTML in 1997, and so the idea of like front page was terrible to me. You know, who would use front page? It's awful. Because I didn't understand it. I understand HTML because I wrote HTML. Sorry, I go off on rabbit trails, and sorry, tangents. I go off on tangents. For those of you, is everybody familiar with the term rabbit trails? I know there's people like not from America. Rabbit trails is when you just start rambling on stuff. Like this, for instance, is a rabbit trail. Exactly. So here's a list of good ones. So GitHub for Mac is great because it integrates directly with GitHub. So that's cool. Git Tower, I've heard really good things about. And then there's a few other ones. So there's some free ones, and then there's ones that you pay for. I guess try them out and see what you like. Yeah.
One that's really good on that list, there's Git plugins for like clips.
Right.
Git plugins for, definitely.
Do it right in your IDE.
Yeah, so there's Git plugins for the different IDEs, right, like for Eclipse and things like that. So that's for Mac. For Windows, GitHub for Windows, Git extensions, Git Cola. So these are all going to be on this, so you can actually, look these up later. Unless you want to take a picture of that. Okay. Git clients for Linux. So for those of you nerds who like to work in Linux, it's okay. You're in good company here. We're all nerds. It's okay. So Git Cola for Linux and Smart Git also for Linux. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. What's it called? GITG. That's for the GNOME client.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't work in Linux. I should, but I don't. I'm sorry. I use a Mac. So Git hosting, okay? So I've been talking about these remote repositories. Where do those live, right? Where do you host those? Theoretically, you could host them on your own server, and I'll tell you about a tool for that. But a better option is to use these hosting services that are built for that. GitHub.com, so the Joomla project is hosted at github.com. They host open source projects for free. If you want to do but open source projects means anybody can access it. So anybody can go and clone that repository and start working and do their own branches and forks. And that's great for Joomla. If you're building a site for your client, they may not want you to have their repository out in public. So you actually pay a fee to GitHub, and you can do private repositories. It's all really secure. It uses private and public key encryption, and so yeah, it's really secure. Bitbucket.org is an option that's free up to a certain number of users, I think, 5 users. Beanstalk app, this is what we use because it's got some really cool deployment tools. Assembla, Codebase, BearGit. Now Gitorious, this is a Ruby on Rails tool. You can actually download it and install it on your own server, and so you can actually host your Git repositories on your own server using Gitorious. So if you're into Ruby on Rails and hosting your own stuff, go for it. I prefer to use one of these guys, but it's totally up to you. So using Git for Joomla projects. How are we doing on time? We got about 30 minutes. Good, plenty of time. So using Git for Joomla projects, we're going to go getting started, establishing your workflow, talk about deployment, and then database issues. That's something we haven't talked about yet, but Git doesn't track databases. So we'll talk about that, some possible solutions. So getting started. So first you want to initialize the root directory of the project where you're going to be working, okay? So initialize an empty directory, git init. Once you've done that, I use MAMP, so whatever you use, wherever you're working. Once you've done that, install Joomla in that directory, okay? Set up your gitignore file to specify the files that you want to ignore. Yeah?
I don't know if it just came up and I was sleeping a little bit, but
Am I that boring?
if you want to add your own files to the gitignore, no. If you want to track your own files but not the Joomla files, there's some kind of regular expression syntax within the gitignore file,
Right.
which allows you to specify the path that you want to track, and so it's actually adding then all the files that are not in that path.
So it's an inverse.
Yeah, I'm not explaining
Yeah.
it all.
No, I know what you're saying.
Inverse.
Inverse, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're saying you can use regular expressions to set within your gitignore file. So I'm not exactly sure how that works, so that might be some research for deeper diving later. So set up your gitignore file, then add your files to the repository with git add dot, okay? That's just real quick. It's going to go through and add all those files into your repository. You might do a git status first. I like to do that just to see it, but you don't have to. And then you commit all your files to the repository. So one thing that Joe taught me was on your first commit, you just say git commit -m, quote, initial commit, or first commit, or project started, or green light go, or whatever you do, you know. Yeah.
I just remember that I think Michael Backer in his public repository has a lot of git ignore files for Joomla.
Yeah.
So
Michael Babker, yeah. So Michael Babker, I think it's M. Babker on GitHub, has a lot of git ignore files for Joomla, really useful tools. So you might check that out.
If you initialize a project on GitHub too, there's a full list of all the different frameworks that will give you a git ignore if you're using something else too.
Yeah. Oh, I'm on this slide. Okay. So you set up your remote hosting for your repository. So once you've got your repository set up locally, this is your first repository, right? So you set up remote hosting. So if you've got like GitHub, you would set it up in GitHub. And then once you've done that, then you push your local repository that you've just created up into GitHub, okay? So then every developer on the project then can go clone that repository, the remote one, onto their system. So everybody's got the repository, everybody's ready to go, right? Sort of, except for the database, right? Because you got to have the database too. So we'll talk about that. So one tip, in your git ignore file, one thing that we do is we ignore the configuration.php file. That way we can set all the parameters in there specific to our local installation of Joomla, because that's a file that's really easy to track and manage, and so just ignore it. Don't worry about tracking it in Git, because it makes your life a whole lot easier when you're developing on your different local systems. So establish your workflow. So there's really 3 styles that I'll talk about. This is kind of the style that we tend to use. It's a subversion style where basically everybody has this shared repository. And so whenever I've made my changes, I push them to the repository. And then at the end of the day or at the beginning of the next day, I pull the repository because I want to pull in all the changes that Joe made. Now, one of the great things about Git is that it won't let you do a push if someone else has done a push since the last time that you've pulled the repository, okay? So that's a good little...
That's a setting, so you push it from an environment where it is allowed.
Right, right. So by default, it's, yeah. So so you don't have to worry about that, you know, in the kind of the standard setup. So everybody pushes their changes to the remote shared repository and then pulls their changes or pulls the other people's changes to merge them into their own system, their own repository. So the integration manager workflow, this is real. I pulled these off of gitscm.com, see? So this is kind of more like how Joomla does it, the Joomla project does it, where you've got all these developers who work, but there's really only a handful of developers who we would call the integration managers who actually have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. They're the ones who, if you do a pull request or a push request, pull request on GitHub for the Joomla project, where like I've got this great idea for a feature in Joomla, I'm going to code it up, I'm going to branch Joomla, make my change, code it up, and then say, hey, Joomla gods, I want my change to be added into Joomla. Well, there's really only a handful of people who can actually bless your change and put it in the blessed repository, okay? And that's kind of how Joomla works. And that's a good way to do it because, you know, ultimately you don't want to have a bunch of rogue developers out there doing stuff. So for an open source project, this makes a lot of sense because you've got potentially hundreds of developers working on the same code. You don't want hundreds of developers pushing their changes willy-nilly without some kind of accountability or some kind of control. Now, one could argue that the control might get heavy-handed sometimes. I don't know. I'm not involved in that, so I don't know. But that's what control's all about, exactly. So yeah. So typically what you have, so this developer public, so you know, if you sign up for a GitHub account, for example, you're going to have your own public repos on GitHub. So if you fork Joomla on GitHub, you're going to have your public repo of Joomla, and then you'll pull that down and work on it privately and then push it up to your own public and say, hey, Joomla, can you pull this in? So for a larger project, if you've got a number of developers, this might make a lot more sense where you've got one guy or two guys that are the managers of the whole flow. For smaller projects, if you're working in a smaller team, we kind of like the other style better, where everybody kind of has access to push to the master repository. Now, a dictator lieutenant's workflow is another option. The way this works is it's kind of like the integration manager workflow, except usually a lieutenant is going to be over a particular subsystem within the system. So you might have, within Joomla, for example, you might have a banners component lieutenant. So you know that's the least coveted lieutenant role in all of Joomla is the banners component. Do what? Right. Yeah, you know, you get the web links component. That's the guy that nobody likes, right? Yeah. We'll just stick him on the web links component. So you got lieutenants over certain subsystems, and then once they've blessed the changes that have been submitted to them, they submit them on to the dictator, and then the dictator has final authority over what gets into the blessed repository. So that's another workflow. Again, depending on your project, depending on the size of your project, you know, one of these might make sense. I mean, for smaller projects, we like the subversion style workflow. So deployment, once all your code has been pushed to your blessed repository, it needs to be then deployed to the production server, okay? Beanstalk has a great tool where you basically enter in some server information and you say deploy, and it pushes all your changes onto the production server. It's cool. That's why we use it. That's why we like it. But essentially, you basically just take the changes from the blessed repository. You take all the files in the blessed repository and overwrite the production server files, and voila. I mean, you deploy to the production server.
That's basically just using FTP to push it. You're not actually on
Right.
Git on that server at all, right?
Right. You could.
I'm sure
You
can.
could, yeah. I
For
mean,
production, generally, you don't want to. So.
I disagree, I absolutely do. On big systems, and I mean, both from staging to production.
Okay.
yeah. That's my wife texting me, sorry. She says, is the conference over yet? No. As a matter of fact, it's not. So database issues. Now this for me is the biggest pain point of using Git with Joomla, because Git does not track changes to your MySQL database. There's really not a good, easy way to do it with Git. And so part of the problem is if we're all working locally, right? So I've got this Joomla installation on my laptop or my computer. Joe's got it on his, Jeremy's got it on his, somebody else has it on his. But we all have to have a Joomla database to work with, right? I mean, Joomla has to have a database. So typically, well, I mean, a few ways you could do it. I mean, if we all have our own database or our own copy of the database on our own systems, there's 4 different copies of the database. But as you all know, when you're developing a Joomla site, you're making changes to the database, right? You're adding menus, you're adding modules, you're adding articles, all of these things. And so how do you deal with that? How do you deal with changes to so many different databases all across your systems? So one option is to point all the instances of Joomla to the same remote database. So you may have different code bases on your local systems, but you're all using the same database. We find that to be really, really useful in a development environment, not so much in staging/production, because the changes that you make on that database are live across all the different copies of the site. So, but in terms of development, we find that works really well if you can gain remote access. So if you're working on a cruddy shared server that won't let you have remote access, tough luck. Option 2 is to manually track the changes. So as you add a menu item, you take a little note that says, I just added this menu item. As you add another menu, module, I added this module. So you manually track it, and then at the end of the day, everybody else has to do that same thing that you just did, which is a real pain. Nobody wants to do that. So option 2, we'll just go ahead and cross that out, because that's terrible. Nobody wants that. Option 3 is actually, there's database synchronization tools out there that I actually just kind of came across this last week. So redgate.com, products, MySQL comparison tools. They have these tools. There's 2 tools that you install. One of them compares the database schemas of 2 different databases. And so if there's been changes in one schema, and it merges the schemas. And then another tool it actually checks the data, and it compares it, and it merges the data into one. So it's kind of like Git for MySQL in a way. I've not used it. I can't vouch for it. I don't know exactly how it works. So you might, proceed with caution. But if this works the way that I think it does, this could be the tool that you need, right? I mean, that's pretty awesome. There's other tools like there's a tool called Navicat that we've used, and other SQL clients that you can use where you can actually sync different databases. They don't quite do all of the data integrity checking, and so where you've got unique IDs that are keying between 2 different tables, stuff like that is going to be difficult to track. So, but you can use stuff like that as well. Yeah.
I've also seen online, I'm not sure if it's Git or GitHub that has hooks that you can hook into for the different processes, but I've seen where somebody set something up so that before they commit, it uses MySQL dump to dump the database file, and then Git will track the dump.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's true as well. So you can actually set a trigger in Git to basically when you commit a change, it'll do a dump in your database. It'll do a dump of your database and store that dump in Git basically, or in your repository, which is really cool.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. So I could see that becoming a real headache, and then you also don't want your database to be in a public repository necessarily. So this again, this is a real pain point. If you guys figure it out and find the silver bullet to kill this issue, if someone wants to invent Git for MySQL, I think you will be a jillionaire. You know, I mean, like, which this may be it. I don't know. So anyway, that's the pain point. So the solution that you go with may vary depending on your project, depending on the server that you're using. Again, if you're using a lame shared server that doesn't allow remote connection to the database, you can't do that. So solutions may vary. So with that, questions. And this is my Twitter handle. It's at Cory Webb, CoryWebb, B, 2 B's. I know how to spell my name, I promise. And JL LeBlanc is Joe's Twitter handle, if you want to tweet him. I'm going to tweet out the link to these slides for your reference. I tried to make it have as much reference material in it as possible for you. So, yes, you had a question.
Oh, it's a total 101 question. But can you just tell me briefly how, or a general overview of how a system like that handles, the various conflicts that can come up between like two users? Like if developer A makes, code something one way and the other guy makes a change of the same, method or something the other way. How does that? I mean, is that up to the lieutenant guy has to look at all the changes and say, oh, I like that guy's better. I'm gonna take that.
Right.
So it is a manual. The whole thing is.
Yeah, I mean, you can merge those changes together. I guess it just comes down to how your project is organized too. I mean, if two guys are working on the exact same problem, I mean, you're probably gonna run into that. So.
But people can't pull the same files and work on them at the same time. So you have to work that out, basically.
Yeah.
What I've encountered for the most part in that kind of situation is whoever is in charge of maintaining the repository will have a tool, like GitHub will tell whether or not that those changes can be cleanly merged, and if not, it'll prevent them from actually merging it. And then it becomes the responsibility ultimately of the person who is trying to get the change in to fix all those changes, fix all those merges locally, and then push it again.
So is it true that if you had a merge where somebody was editing you have two people editing two files, some guy's editing up in one spot, somebody else editing in another, that would merge okay, but if they were editing the same node, that would become a conflict?
Yeah, usually if you're editing different parts of the file, it's fine.
Right.
But if you end up editing the same exact line, then you end up with a merge conflict.
Cool, thank you.
And Git tries to use a lot of different algorithms to avoid that because, Cory adds several lines, adds 10 lines to the top here, and I'm working on what would have been the 10th line here. But it can tell that Cory's additions are just purely additions. It'll then usually repopulate that to avoid the problem.
The difference is tracking content versus tracking like line numbers. It just purely tracks the content of the file, not anything else.
The problem is that if you don't use the match command, you can actually see what changes they're doing. If you take, for example, replace spaces with tabs and stuff like that, you get loads of changes in one file, but they only change 2 lines, and then you get a conflict. I usually get that.
I had a lot of line edits.
Yeah.
I standard line edits.
Are there
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say you become keenly aware of your white space issues when you begin to use Git.
Yeah.
for those of us who are still obviously doing it wrong using SVN, is there tools, because I'm a one-man show, so I really didn't see any collaboration stuff down. So, but is there tools to be able to import the changes we made from the SV, basically all the tracking for SVN into Git, so that all of those, we don't lose our revisions?
Right. So the question is there a tool for importing your history from SVN into Git so that you don't lose all that? The answer is yes. That's the short answer. The long answer is I don't know what it is.
I use that daily because I haven't yet made all the way over to Git. So I have a support repository which all my company works in. As a manager, I use Git, and a couple of co-workers of mine use Git, and we commit to the subversion repository.
Okay.
So we keep the subversion has the master repository. It has all the changes. I only have my local copy of that.
So he's living on the edge. He's using Git and Subversion at the same time.
Yeah, Git
Git
Yeah.
SVN module.
Yeah.
There you go.
Except
Git SVN module.
subversion branches in Git. That's the only no-no.
And then there's also another tool that ships with Git where if you want to go full Git and get off of SVN, it will convert your SVN repository over to Git.
Yeah.
Do you have to do that like at the beginning of your setting up your Git repository? Can you do it at any point?
You want to do that when we start.
That's what
Yeah.
I imagine. Yeah.
Well, and
Before going forward.
Couldn't we just use the Git SVN minus S clone and just pull everything on the subversion and then just do go in, edit remote files in Git directory and then push it out?
now, and if you think it sounds like a big project, I mean, like Joomla did it. Joomla pulled, moved from SVN to Git, and Drupal did it. We don't like Drupal, but they did it.
Well, it also depends on.
I'm kidding.
there are
Drupal, we love you.
Depending on exactly what kind of version history you want to keep. So if you aren't exactly, if you don't need all version history of every branch, you can just do one of the easier options.
I think Alex had a question.
This is easy compared to those, I think. So we use SVN and we use externals, which are basically you have the same chunk of code that might be used in multiple projects. Have you ever used that in Git, and is that something you can do? Because I know one it's been bolted onto SVN and it doesn't work. It's very kludgy. Is that something you can do easily in Git?
Yeah, that's a question I've asked Joe before too. It's
Git
the
has a system called submodules. And
submodules.
The last time I looked at them, they were kind
I'm
of.
saying it for the
I think they're
video.
always a pain.
Yeah.
I mean, in SVN, they're really a pain. And to get them to work, it's like, please work.
So let me repeat your question for the sake of the video. Okay. So the question was, is there a way to track if you have a chunk of code that's going to be used in multiple projects? Is there a way to track it in that, track that in Git, and then also these other projects in Git, but without having to track it in different places? And the answer was Git has submodules for that sort of.
Comment on that. I've tried out Git submodules to do something useful with it. And actually my practice case was to have one Joomla Git environment. So that was like the development side for a certain customer. Then have separate components which also had their own Git repository. But the real problem of Git submodules is each submodule has to have its own directory, and all of these directories are on the same level. So basically with the ID of one Joomla install, which is a Git repository, then inside it specific component folders, where you would have like a multi-level folder structure, and then it's not working anymore.
And similar issues exist with SVN, where you almost have to have one massive repository for all these projects and do them together. And so
No solution.
so they haven't fixed that either. So
Great. Thanks a lot, Git. Yeah.
What if you've got a client that has had somebody else do work, and you want to pull the whole site in and pull their site down, and then you're going to basically start tracking certain.
If it's already in Git, you're
No,
good. If
it's-
it's not, you just pull it in and then just hit Git init and just start fresh. I mean, you can do Git init after the files are already in there,
Okay.
and then you
So I
do
can
Git
pull it from the
add.
server to my local
Yeah,
machine
yeah, that's
and get
fine.
everything started
Yeah,
there.
you're just starting fresh. So any changes that happened before you did that are not tracked. You just assume it's a fresh project. So, yeah.
Okay.
So you pull down this project, install it. Well, I guess you could do Git init on an empty folder and then pull down the project into that folder, and then do Git add. Excuse me, Git add, Git commit.
But you can
Git
do a
push.
Git init on a folder with stuff in it. And
Yeah.
then just simply do an add right
Yeah,
off and
right.
commit
You could
right
do that
away.
too. Yeah. I mean, it's
That's what
it's however you want to do it. It's
Okay.
Yeah.
so. And I'll say, I mean, like for us anyway. I mean, before Joe came along and forced us to use Git, we did the whole, who modified my template.css file, because now it's broken. You ruined all my code that I so eloquently wrote. So it's been a great tool for us because you have the freedom to make the changes that you need to make and not worry that the other guy on the team is going to overwrite your changes and break what you just did. So we have one more question. Beanstalk.
Beanstalk.
Yeah,
Um,
like
does
Jack
it
and the
have
Beanstalk.
an ability to add the GitHub repository of Joomla as a remote, so that you clone the sources from Joomla at GitHub, and then use those sources as your own local repository for the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, you can add as many remotes as you want, but they should be the same general project. Like you wouldn't add Drupal and Joomla as a remote because
No.
it would be the same.
Yeah. All right. I have stickers if anybody wants a sticker. And that's it.